Hi guys, and welcome to this Houdini video tutorial. Today we're going to have a look at doing light and camera matching within Houdini, and yeah, let's get started. So here I'm in a fresh scene, but prior to this I made sure that I set my project using file set project, and I'm in VFX 1819. And I've also, into that project, made sure that I placed the reference background plate and the HDR image, as well as our OBJ file, into that scene itself. And what we're going to be doing here is doing a light match and a camera match within Houdini. So we're actually going to be working with some geometry, and I'm going to, in that geometry, actually use our trusty dragon object itself, and again I've put it into the VFX file, and I encourage you to do the same. The dragon itself is quite large, so I'm just going to use a transform and scale it down to 0.1, and that'll kind of make it a reasonable size. Next, what I want to do is maybe just rename this. Let's go dragon. Here we go. What we can do is quickly just drop in a camera, and we can drop in our environment light. And for the environment light, let's kind of quickly just see what this actually does. We can go to our render view and hit render, which Houdini will then create a mantra IPR node and just spit out a render for us. This environment light is essentially shining pure white light from every single polygon of that sphere facing inwards towards this object, and it's lighting it uniformly and kind of giving this almost ambient occlusion type of effect. But what we want to do is, under the environment map, actually use our HDR image instead and bring that in, and what will happen is that we are now illuminating this entire scene based on that HDR image. You also have light intensity here, and under the render options you also have sampling quality of that light image itself. If we go back to our scene view, actually in the render, I'm just going to hit pause, and in the scene view you can actually see what our scene actually looks like, or the HDR looks like in the after it's been imported. There we go. Next, what we want to do is use our backplate on our camera and set up a few things so that we can actually line up our image itself. So on our camera, what we will want to do is, under the view, go to background image and click on our icon, and we want to bring in this 0352 mil 1/160 and use that as the background plate. Now, luckily with this, the orientation of our environment light and the background plate match identically already. If they did not, you could always use the rotation tools of the HDR to spin it to whichever degree you particularly need to line it up properly with the background plate. The next thing that we'll want to do is pay attention to some of the key settings in our camera itself to actually have this aligned correctly. At the minute, your default focal length for a camera is set to 50 mils, and this is the actual parameter that you would want to change if you wanted to zoom a lens. Most people generally think that by holding down spacebar and right mouse button, that's a zoom. This is actually physically moving the camera closer to an object, or dollying the camera. To zoom a camera, the camera remains stationary, and you change the focal length to actually zoom the camera itself. Now, for matching photographic plates, you need to be aware of the focal length that it was shot with, and because we took notes when we actually recorded this, this is a 52mm focal length, so we can set that up first. The next thing that we also need to pay attention to is the aperture, because again, this particular slider also changes the look of our scene. and you need to be aware of the type of camera that you shot it with, because this parameter links to the sensor size of that camera body. And if I can quickly bring up a really nice article on photographic.com. This was done quite a few years ago, but this is comparing sensor sizes between different phones and cameras, and gives you a lot of information. But if I scroll down just a tad, you can see that we have this table that shows iPhone 5 all the way up to IMAX film framings in terms of dimensions of the sensor size and the overall cropping factor, all of which you need to be very, very aware of when you're doing camera matching. Now, this photograph is actually taken on a 35mm full frame sensor, so we want to actually use the width in millimeters as the aperture parameter. So this 36 is what we want to use in Houdini. So if we jump back, we want to change our aperture to 36, and that's going to be as accurate as we can kind of get just by manually matching things up. So we want to use the perspective lines in the scene and our grid, and as much information as we can to try and match up our scene. We could even make dummy geometry like boxes back here to try and match up to the buildings if we needed to. But we're going to use the grid lines here to try and kind of match up perspective. And because we've taken all of that data down correctly, you should find it far easier to actually match up the perspective to the photographic plate. One last thing that you can actually do is under the display options, by hovering over your icon and pressing D, you could go to background, and here under camera you've got the brightness channel for the background plate. And if we dim it, you should be able to adjust a little bit more contrast between it and the grid to actually see what you're doing. Once you actually have that placed correctly, you can do a few things to test. Again, I would drop in a box to actually check perspective further away in the scene, and also see where your horizon line is. That's fairly easy. If we drop down a grid and just scale up our grid by 10 or 100, you can see where the horizon line actually is in the photograph as well. A lot of things that we can actually do. Okay, so that will take a little bit of getting used to and fiddling around to actually get it to work. But with those parameters set up correctly, you should be able to actually match to the reference image itself. All I'm going to do now is maybe just push our geometry back a tad in Z, and let's kind of move it across and maybe give it a bit of rotation so it sits in our scene nice and easy. What we'll do in the next part is show you how to actually add some materials and do some exporting of AOVs, so that when we render this out as an image, it's ready to use with Nuke. One thing that you can do straight off the bat is that you wouldn't necessarily want to render this image with the background plate actually baked into it. So once you've actually got this all set up correctly in the way that you like, I would go to the camera and just turn off this background image. You can either do it by toggling the enable or just deleting out the file itself. Okay, so that'll do it for this part. Stay tuned for the second part, and we'll actually show you how to do the materials and the rendering stage of this. Okay, thanks very much guys. Stay tuned for more.